This isn't Audible. Presenting J.R.R. Tolkien, Tales of the Fourth Age of Middle-earth, of Samwise Gamgee and the Shire folk. Narrated by Narrator. Introduction. This was never solely a scholarly endeavour into the Fourth Age of Middle-earth, more so a narrative exploration into the blank spaces between the appendices from Tolkien's works, attempting to bridge the gap between the written narrative and the lore that precedes the ending of The Lord of the Rings. Well, I'm back. Not with ludicrous fanfiction, with disregard for lore and logic, with grandiose events and core character changes, or entirely new main characters. I instead went with small, logically conceivable moments taking place in the Fourth Age, such as sitting in Baggins' garden. This is where my writing began. It started with a poem, which originally I proposed to be from Bilbo, but later I gave it to an old Sam looking out from his garden and considering his musings to be like one of old Mr. Bilbo's rhymes. This subsequently would become the first of the short stories, A Gardener's Garden, setting the scene before recalling Mr. Bilbo, although before I got to the poem I was already at the bottom of my one-page short story, so I kept writing and musing over an old Samwise Gamgee. The poem itself never actually made it into any of the short stories, becoming lost among the unfolding narrative as I wrote, and also disappeared in our world, with some deleting of voice notes at some point in time, with seemingly no evidence of me writing it down anywhere else, and like the forgotten memory of most of the lines of the poem in my mind, the place of a physical note or a Word document is similarly lost. The poem was a catalyst of these tales, forgotten but no less appreciated. And I'm also grateful for the sunny weather that day, out in the van, as many shafts of light came through between the branches and trunks of the forest lining the road, dazzling my unshaded eyes, with the Lord of the Rings audiobook playing or still on my mind, which, as always, with Tolkien's works, inspires me. These words followed, first in my mind, then out loud. The sun pierces thine eyes, I block with lidded shields. Unfortunately, at this time of writing, these are the only lines I can positively remember. The subsequent lines and rhymes to follow, and the personification of the sun as a knight being, if a faded glimpse of my memory can be believed, recorded into voice notes and, as has been told, lost in both mental memory and digital. In regards to the premise as a whole, I had the desire to have Sam not leave Middle-earth without proper farewells, so I did take some creative license, as none of these interactions are stated or suggested in any form, such as in the case of Samwise going to Gondor in between the lore events of Rosie's death on Mid-Year's Day of 4th Age 61 and the exchange of the Red Book with his daughter Eleanor and his sailing to the Undying Lands later that same year. With an approximate 4 to 5 months from Mid-Year's Day until what would be considered late in the year, into the months of October and November, considering that Gandalf took 3 months to do the same journey from the Shire to Minas Tirith without the haste of Shadowfax, mind you, and similarly Boromir took 111 days from Minas Tirith to Rivendell, and that's with the loss of his horse while crossing the Grey Flood. I concluded that with the Greenway restored, the road south now safe under the protection and maintenance of the reunited kingdom, and with general peace since the fall of Sauron, Sam's journey would be possible within this time frame. This time frame for Samwise's journey was not always present and was corrected in later drafts. Originally, it was to meet him in a week's time. This was not the only inconsistency, with more incorrect recollections during the writing process. Further due diligence to maintain lore accuracy took place throughout the multiple drafts and final drafts. Here are 4 examples of incorrect recollections and corrections, in no particular order, simply as they come to mind. 1. Removing reference to serving as mayor after A Gardener's Garden as his 7th term ended with his resignation in 4th Age 55, and any other references to him as mayor, such as with King Elisar, "You may be mayor, and I am king of Arnor and Gondor." 2. When referring to the Littlans between 4th Age 48 and 4th Age 61, this is confirmed with the addition of his grandson to the story, as Sam's children are all of age. Later lines refer to his children at the table, which can still apply to any number of his 13 children, either visiting or still living at Bag End. 3. While Sam is in Minas Tirith, the Red Book was changed to only showing it to King Elisar instead of incorrectly allowing it to be transcribed on this visit, being correctly attributed with reference to Fane Peregrine in 4th Age 64. 4. Directly quoting "You bow to no one," and a knowing smile from previously saying this to Sam, being changed as this was only from the film. Apart from already dated events such as Rosie's death, I have purposely kept the year they take place vague, to the extent of, unless already stating in the appendices, not mentioning at all. The times of each tale are as follows. The Gardener's Garden, taken place a few years after his 7th term as mayor, begins in 4th Age 48 and before his resignation in 4th Age 55. The same can be said for the next, A Well-Used Gift, with an extension to the later year being before 4th Age 61 as Rosie is present. But it could also be as early as the same day as the Gardener's Garden, as a continuation. A precise date for a farewell to the Shire can be, at least for the beginning, firmly placed not long after Mid-Year's Day, 4th Age 61. There is a time jump ahead to Gondor, which, with travel, has Sam arriving in August or September. The following tale, however, can be firmly placed a few days after the end of the previous, as the Garden of Gondor states, in comparison to the days prior in Minas Tirith, keeping it vague but not alluding to weeks being spent there. It also shows that less time has been spent in Eminanen, leaving a similar amount of months for the return journey. I'd also like to mention, albeit in short, the appendix on the final page of this book, along with the known births, deaths, successions, and events from a Lord of the Rings appendices. I have taken some creative license in continuing up to the year 4th Age 223, which, based on the ages of named characters in Tolkien's 13-page abandoned sequel, The New Shadow, is approximately when it would take place. There are purposely unnamed sons and grandsons of named kings and princes, in often created instances for their successions or simply stating a death. In only one instance, I created a name. This was for Eldarion's unnamed son, who would be of the appropriate age to be king when his father dies in 4th Age 220. The name I chose was Elrondil, a combination of his great-grandfather Elrond Half-Elven and many greats Elendil the Tall. Alongside the sentimental value is hopefully sound etymology, which is as follows. El is a compound of Elen, star, with rond, domed roof, in this case the Tower Hall, and Endil, friend, and implies devotion and love for his house, the emblem of which is 7 stars and a crown above the tree of Gondor. Now that I have somewhat explained how these short stories came to be, I will lastly address the writing itself, and my sincere attempts at emulating and recreating J.R.R. Tolkien's writing style and cadence to keep these tales true to where they came from. In both what Christopher referred to as his father's secondary world, and our own in which it was created. To continue with my sincerity, I hope I have been successful in my endeavour, and I welcome you back to Middle-earth. A Gardener's Garden. The door began to open to get a cool breeze into its halls. Loose papers fluttered their edges as if awakening from an afternoon nap. Specks of unsettled dust took flight, dancing in the sunlight peering through the opening, and an old hobbit's grey hair bristled gently against the wrinkled brow of Samwise Gamgee, Mayor of Mitchell Delving, serving his 7th term as such, with many esteemed accomplishments behind him, upon him, and to come. Of course, which none is more told in tales and sang in song than his part in the War of the Ring. The retelling of such deeds is among the pages of the Red Book of Westmarch. Sam stepped out from his front door onto the first of many stone slabs that had been bathing in the warmth of that day's afternoon sun. The river of paved rock that ran and twisted down to the front gate was lined on either side by flower beds, twisting and bursting with many colours of many plants and shrubs, swaying in the breeze with their leaves waving to greet their gardener. Standing upon the threshold of his home, at length he took in a deep breath and nodded to them. "'Tis a good day, my dears," Sam announced as he gently passed his fingers through the manes and crowns of petals and leaves. "That's as certain as can be, and there's no arguing against such a truth," he smiled, "even if you did have mouths to use and a thought to share and reply back to me with, if you get my meaning." Sam chuckled to himself as he turned heel on the spot. Hands deep in his maroon and green jacket pockets, sleeves rolled up to below his elbows, his wrinkled and pale arms sticking out like young trunks of birch from pots. In as swift a motion as his aged hips would allow, he spun round away from the path and stepped onto the blades of grass. Daisies speckled amongst the carpeted greens, which made up his well-maintained lawn. As you would expect, a feat as such was achieved by precisely clipping and snipping around the white and yellow spots to leave them be. Once a foot has walked through the lifeless lands of Mordor, or what was once known as such, a dark land, once under shadow and the dominion of a now extinguished fire of blazing malice and torment, which, at a time, and for a good while, threatened to engulf the lands of all Middle-earth. Such a place was a land of jagged stone, and bogs of decay, pits of ash, and riddled paths of sharp-toothed rock constantly gnashing and gnawing. After such a journey from which one has returned, indeed, that is the feeling of grass between toes, bowing under heels and tickling the arches. That feeling for those few is never taken for granted. Sam unsheathed his hands and drew his arms out to the sky, stretching his creaky bones and rivet joints, his fingers springing out from his palms. Arms apart, with a sudden jolt, he clapped his hands in a single applause as he sat down on his garden bench. From oak it was made, its legs painted in the same green as the door back end, and its arms adorned with finely chiselled twists and turns of carved vines, crafted by the finest carpenters on this side of the Brandywine, that is to say, by the hands of hobbits. For long years men have not entered the lands of the Shire, as was put into law by King Elisar of the reunited kingdom, many, many years ago. Great workmanship can be found in the Shire, and a great bench it was that lay upon the high banks of Baggend's garden, with, as is to be expected, by such a talented gardener as Samwise, the spot was surrounded by flowers, as if it were a stage, and the blossoming fauna sat in their seats upon rows and rows, sat in hushed anticipation, as an audience before the theatre. Hands clasped together on his lap, he took in another deep breath and smiled. "A good day indeed," he muttered. "Good afternoon to you, Mayor Gamgee, sir, your mayorship, Samwise," came a voice from the road, a voice of a young woman, a soft voice, but with the jolly jeer of the Shire folk. As Sam looked over yonder from his high seat, that looked down upon the road, he saw her and her 2 young hobbit children, one running in circles, with the younger peering curiously out from the ebb and flow of the woman's dress. Sam sprung up and waved in reply. "Good afternoon indeed, missus." His voice cracked, his greeting disappearing into the abyss it created, as he could not fully recall the name of his particular hobbit. Many a hobbit he knows through his position as mayor over these many years. Some are long gone and no longer remembered. Some are left never to be erased, and some sprout up like fresh daffodils in spring, without the foggiest idea who they are, more so if no time can be given to learn. His mind was active, with a fluster of names, whos and wheres, them, and that was that's, hows and whens. A mind long sharpened over the years with age, dulled with it too. But alas, at what seemed at length to him. He spoke, yet it was no time at all for her. Yes, always a pleasure to see the Proudfoots." He smiled, and then gasped, but before he could continue, "Proud feet," she proclaimed, with a pointed finger down towards the floor and, on the other hand, a finger shaken towards Sam, but with a kind smile on her face. "Apologies, Mrs. Proudfoot. Enjoy the rest of this fine day." He cheered, and with an exchange of final waves to her and her boys, he sat back down. He then found his mind rushing back over years, through time, far back but not far away, down towards the fields at the bottom of the hill. Back when there were tents, many benches around, with islands of tables and chairs, food and drink, and many a hobbit to celebrate the 111th birthday of one Bilbo Baggins. A well-used gift. The evening sun was skipping from branch to branch, dancing on the golden leaves of the mallow tree, which Sam had planted many years ago down in the party field. It stood as the only mallow west of the mountains and east of the sea, and was regarded by the wise, and continues to be so by the many who have looked upon it as one of the finest in the world, a testament to its gardener and the tree's ancient roots, which go deep into the past, back to Tar Aldarion and Gil-galad, the high kings of old, back to the lands of Numenor long before its fall. Further they go still, to the elves of Tol Eressëa and Valinor beyond, and times uncounted. The light flooded his vision as memories flowed into his mind, meeting Lady Galadriel, the forests of Lothlorien, the giving of gifts, and the elven boats on the river. The past, which first came as a gently flowing brook, became a rushing torrent. Riding the rapids, he struck a sharp rock beneath the raging foam. His mind cascaded into the orcs in pursuit, the ring and Gollum. "That stinker," Sam muttered. His brow furrowed, and his eyes scrunched. "That treacherous, forsaken creature, Goll," he muttered again through gritted teeth as his fist clenched. As he came to a sudden stop, his ears felt like they could start steaming, until those ears heard a familiar voice calling from an open window at Bag End. "Supper's ready, dear. You've been at those flower pots, I bet. Wash those green fingers of yours before you sit at my table." The loving voice of Rosie called out, "Coming, Rosie. Just a moment. These legs aren't as nimble as the little uns." He called back up the hill. Sam looked down at his hands and smiled. Soft earth was snuggling behind his fingernails, and smudges of greens and browns splayed out across his hands and hid in his wrinkles. She always knows, he jested to himself. After giving a farewell pat to his bench, like a dam across a river, the current subsided into calm pools of memories as he stopped for a moment to float in them. At length he returned to the present as he shook gently out of floating, and he looked back over all the dancing leaves as he did so often, as he did moments ago, although, so often as is normal, all that would come to him of the past was drips and drops, spit spots and trickles. But that had felt like he had been drowned and dragged under the weight of the worst ones. After closing his eyes for a moment, he opened them slowly. The sunbeams stabbed at his shielded sight. Through squinted eyes, he was still peering blurringly at the dancing leaves, with the branches bristling upon a warm wind. He got up and turned towards the path that led back up to the round door. As he approached the threshold, still damp from the memories, the water had receded, and he was left with what the tide brought in, his final meeting with Galadriel on the road to the Grey Havens. "I hear and see that you have used my gift well. The Shire shall now be more than ever blessed and beloved." Her voice whispered in his mind like a sweet dream. Next came the elves, and the many faces he had seen of that fair race, living far from the Shire in Sam's reckoning before the ring, then only knowing of them in stories and the imaginings they painted. Though some are now even further off beyond, having sailed back to Valinor, far away out of any counting or guessing. Above all that had left was his dear friend Frodo, who left with them, sailing from the havens. My dear Frodo, bless him! He sighed, with a half-smile peeking around the corner of his lips. As time was clearly drawing on from when he had been summoned to supper, Sam stood at the step where many a fine hobbit and even a wizard once stood. He turned again to the malon tree, and he smiled. Though far away, it's all within reach if you know where to look, he said as he patted his left breast pocket, closed his eyes, and tapped the side of his head with 2 soft knocks as that warm wind came up to meet him. He hears the rustling of the leaves, his children at the table, and his grandson Holdfast running around it, Frodo Gardener close behind in pursuit of his adventurous son. Over the clamour of feet and yammering of many mouths, he hears the sweet humming of a song from the kitchen, and if he listened carefully upon that warm breeze, was the calling of the sea. Farewell to the Shire. The garden at Bag End was tidy and well kept, as it always was, and was plain to see in that day's sunshine. But one couldn't know that no new bulbs or seeds for the spring would be put to soil, and that no new colours of blossom were to be seen by Samwise Gamgee. It was 1482, Shire reckoning, and the 61st year of the Fourth Age, and an early winter lay cold upon Bag End and the hearts of those in it, following the recent death of Rosie on Mid-Year's Day. Sam wrote to his daughter Eleanor to meet him at the Tower Hills later that same year, but before that he had some final errands and farewells to make, with one more journey south, with an exact date and time to come in later letters. His final night in Hobbiton was spent in the Green Dragon, with his friends, family, and many a hobbit. Though the sting was still fresh, memories of Rosie were on every bar stool and cup of ale, from each plank of wood to the smallest piece of cutlery. Still, the night was merry. They drank to good health, and to those no longer with us. To Farmer Cotton, the bravest hobbit, save the 4 heroes of the Shire. A group of fellow farmers called from their corner table. The room cheered. Sam's eldest son, Frodo Gardener, climbed upon a stool and then proclaimed, Bilbo Baggins, the oldest hobbit to ever live, with his cup held high. The room roared even louder with hearty cheers. Merry and Pippin, even as old as they were, and with some aid, stood up on the top of the table, almost touching the beams of the ceiling, which is no easy feat for the usual height of the Shire folk. To Frodo Baggins, our cousin, dearest friend and hero of all Middle-earth, they called out in unison, as the room erupted with clinks and clangs and with many splashes of spilled ale and cheers. Glasses and cups were raised higher than ever, and to those who knew pointed to the west. Sam sat still for a moment, looking over at the bar. To my dearest Rosie, my love, he whispered to himself for no one to hear. He drank the last swig of ale from his cup and sat for another moment. At length he set his cup down and got up, and with a scan of the room he proceeded around, and after some hushed pats on the shoulders and farewells to those close to him, he was ready to go. He slipped out the door and into the cool night, back up to Bag End. In the morning, with everything settled and in order, and with a pony-drawn cart waiting on the road, he left his garden and started upon the road towards the edge of the Shire and the roads of a reunited kingdom, down to Minas Tirith. Sam had a familiar song in his heart and on his lips. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where long began. Now far away the road will send, and I will follow till its end, pursuing it with old warm feet, until it takes me far away, where all the paths and last errands meet, and whither then I can sure say. As he sang, he took one last look at Bag End, as he was not planning on returning this way on his last errand. His purpose for the journey was to show King Elisar his final pages of the Red Book of Westmarch, although copies would not be made till a few years after this meeting, when, at the request of the king, Thane Peregrine Took would bring it to be transcribed. This copy would be known as the Thane's Book. Through the many gates, Sam went up the many levels of the city, with the accompaniment of the king's guards. Their helms shone, and feathers upon them shimmered and swayed in the breeze that came cool, but not bitter, from the fields of the Pelennor. At length he reached the great halls of the king, and there to greet him was King Elisar. He was not in full royal regalia, but he was kingly none the less. His crown upon his head and the oathstone on his chest shone brighter than ever. As he drew nearer, Sam began to bow. King Elisar shook his head.
"My friend, you forget. Although I am King of Arnor and Gondor, of the reunited kingdom, that would not have been so, if not for you. So arise, my dear Samwise."
He gently pushed his hands against Sam's shoulders and raised him upright with a smile, with more reason behind it than the meeting of old friends. Before Sam stood a king, but also Aragorn the Dunedain. And still Strider the Ranger was there also. As Sam looked up at them, King Elisar knelt down on one knee and bowed his head low. All those in attendance fell silent, then followed. After a moment, Sam finally breathed again and began to speak. "Strider? Oh, pardon me, Lord." Sam stumbled through his words with a whisper, which came as a shout amongst the pillars. King Elisar raised his head, and his eyes met Sam's, as they were now matched almost in height, and began to stand.
"Samwise Gamgee, dearest of hobbits, most honoured of hobbits. Yet here I am, in some ways forgetting that you are a hobbit."
King Elisar smiled.
"Of course you must be hungry, after today's travel, though I do not doubt you have with you plenty of provisions already, and your pots and pans. I have made ready a feast in your honour. I'm sure any further business beyond this joyous meeting of old friends can wait till after."
Standing at his full stature, he gestured to his servants.
"Surely, yes, though my interruption of your bearing was not for my stomach. Yet I'll gladly follow your lead, my lord, and lead me to this feast."
Sam stood, beaming and rubbing his belly. Side by side, they walked together through the hall. The Garden of Gondor. On his last day in the great walled city, Aragorn assured Sam, before setting off to see Faramir at Emenan, that Gimli would be with Legolas at the Elven colony in Ithilien, for days before and after his arrival, and know of his coming. The journey was fair, and nothing troubled him bar the memories of eviler days, which still lay dormant like dust upon the trees, hillocks, and fields of Ithilien, though beauty had returned since the end of the War of the Ring. As a gardener, he could truly appreciate the return of Ithilien as the Garden of Gondor. At length he arrived and met in the halls of the Prince and Steward of Gondor, Faramir, who was old, at the cusp of 100 years, but youth was still in his eyes, mind and body. Though his grey hair and beard and the many lines that weathered his face of old scars and wrinkles of old age showed his years, his true lineage would be confirmed over a score later upon his death at the age of 120, an age of no ordinary man. Sam then came to greet Lady Eowyn, yet old and fading as the race of men do, at such an age of 91, her age could not hide her beauty. Presently, Faramir then introduced their only son, Erebron, and his family was there also. His son and Faramir's grandson, Barahir, was a strong and wise young man, barely of 100 and a few years at most at this time, a sprouting tree amongst old oaks. Barahir took particular interest in the writings of the Red Book of Westmarch Sam had with him. Though this meeting was brief in comparison to the days prior in Minas Tirith, they were no less loved and appreciated by his hosts. Setting off again, he soon reached his next destination. Upon his arrival, Gimli embraced Sam and cheered. Easing off his grip on the old hobbit, he stood back.
Glad to hear tales that the lady's beauty still remains here in Middle-earth, not just in memory, but in root, branch, and leaf. One day I would like to look upon it. If a dwarf can end up in such a place as the Shire, I cannot say, but hope I will. I say to you now.
He nodded, fingering the jewel that encased her strands of golden hair, which was set upon a brooch he proudly wore on his chest. Legolas put his hand on Gimli's shoulder. I see a golden crown of melon leaves on your head, my friend. Many journeys head west. That's why you are here, is it not? He turned his gaze to Sam, then knelt to Sam's hobbit height, and began to sing. To the sea, the white gulls are crying, the wind is blowing, and the white foam is flying. West, west away. Legolas paused and smiled at Sam, with a far-knowing glimmer in his elven eyes. You sing the truth, Sam said, and gave a small applause. It was said at the Grey Havens there'd be a boat to bear me across, and that time has come. I held the ring for a time, you see, a ring-bearer, but I still shudder at the thought of how that felt. He winced, and that was but a short while. Poor Master Frodo's burden was heavy and long, too long endured, he said shakingly. Legolas put his hands on Sam's shoulders. Those long burdens he suffered here have been long unburdened, gladly cured, and blissfully forgotten once he crossed over the sea, my friend. He smiled again as he got up. I'm glad. Sam sighed with relief. Nearly losing his train of thought, he continued. The sea, though, I'm not one for even a paddle in the brandy-wine, if you get my meaning. He chuckled. Although, if the craft of the vessel is that of the boats at Lothlorien, then that would put my hobbit sea legs, or lack of any, at ease. He looked down, and slowly shook his legs side to side. Legolas was staring into the distance. If one had a compass, or a keen sense of direction, they'd see he was gazing to the west and the undying lands. Returning to the near, he looked down at Sam. Far greater craft than anything in this world. It shall send you over the sea, and as a ring-bearer, as you stated, you have no need to worry of any weather or currents, storms or floating adrift. The straight road awaits you. He rested his hand on Sam's shoulder, and their eyes met, with their thoughts entwined into one, in silent understanding. Till we meet again, Samwise Gamgee. With final smiles and farewells, Legolas and Gimli bade fair travel to that dear hobbit of their fellowship, for his way back up north and his final plans in Middle-earth. So with full hearts they returned to their halls of stone and tree, until many years later, after the death of King Elisar, they too would answer the call to the sea. Appendix. The Fourth Age. The Fourth Age was not held to have begun until Master Elrond departed, and the time was come for the dominion of men, and the decline of all other speaking peoples in Middle-earth. The last ship from the Grey Havens departed in the year 3021 of the Third Age. The kings, princes, and lords of the Fourth Age. Year stated, then event given. Year 2. Elberon, son of Faramir and Eowyn, is born. Year 8. Elfwine, son of King Eomer and Lothloriel, princess of Dal Amroth, is born. Year 34. Imrahil, prince of Dal Amroth, dies. His son, Elfhere, becomes the 23rd prince. Year 39. Barahir, son of Elberon, is born. Year 43. Eldarion, son of King Elisar and Arwen, is born. Year 48. Elfwine has children. Year 63. King Eomer dies. His son Elfwine becomes king of Rohan. Year 67. Prince Elfir dies. His son Halfrost becomes the 24th prince. Year 82. Faramir dies. His son Elberron succeeds him as steward of Gondor and prince of Ithilien. Year 93. Elfwine's grandson is born. Year 95. Prince Alfrost dies with no heirs. A new line is started with heirs of Elfwine, with his mother's side tracing back to Imrazor. Elfwine's son, aged 47, becomes the 25th prince of Dal Amroth. Year 100. Durin VII becomes king. Year 103. Elfwine dies. Son becomes king of Rohan. The princedom of Dal Amroth is passed to his 10-year-old son and becomes the 26th prince, with the captain of Dal Amroth as regent. Year 108. King of Rohan falls ill and dies. His son becomes king. With no prince, the captain and his successors continue to govern as regent. Year 109. Elberron dies. His son Barahir succeeds him as steward of Gondor and prince of Ithilien. Year 118. Regent of Dal Amroth dies, succeeded by his eldest son. Year 120. King Elisar dies. His son Eldarion becomes king of Arnor and Gondor of the reunited kingdom. Year 121. In the absence of Lord Gimli, the Council of Alglorond is formed. Year 128. Regent of Dal Amroth dies, succeeded by his brother. Year 130. Elfwine's grandson has twins. Year 145. Twins come of age and become the 27th and 28th princes of Dal Amroth. The regency of Dal Amroth ends. Year 170. Elrondil, son of King Eldarion, is born. Year 200. King of Rohan dies. The firstborn twin succeeds him as king. Year 215. Prince of Dal Amroth dies. His eldest son becomes the 29th prince. Year 220. King Eldarion dies. His son Elrondil succeeds him as king of Arnor and Gondor of the reunited kingdom. Year 221. A failed assassination attempt on King Elrondil. A number of key figures in Gondor are found dead, and within the White Tree of Gondor iconography stained black. Years of unrest. Year 223. Dal Amroth is attacked by an army under a banner of a dark tree. The Prince of Dal Amroth is overthrown by its leader Hermior. The War of the New Shadow begins.
That was Tales of the Fourth Age of Middle-earth of Samwise Gamgee and the Shire Folk, inspired by the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. Read by narrator. This program was recorded in the spare room, a DIY audiobook.
Thank you for listening.